So in the final video here for 1.4, I want to look at more exercises from the text. We've already looked at a few dealing with deductive arguments there in exercise set 1. And so now we will go ahead and look at the second set of exercises here from 1.4, which deals specifically with inductive arguments. And so we're simply tasked with determining if they're strong or weak, and then cogent or uncogent. And so looking at, again, we'll start with the problem number 2. We'll leave the starred ones for you to work on your own. But number 2 here says, the ebb and flow of the tides has been occurring every day for millions of years, but nothing lasts forever. Therefore, probably the motion of the tides will die out within a few years. So the first thing we need to do is assume the premises are true, right? So we're going to assume that it's true that the ebb and flow of the tides has been occurring every day for millions of years. Let's also assume it's true that nothing lasts forever. If both of those things were true, would it then be likely, right, because that's all we're asking here, not guaranteed, but would it be likely that the motion of the tides will die out within the next few years? If you pause and think about that a little bit, I think it quickly becomes apparent that no, that conclusion is not likely, because simply the second premise says nothing lasts forever, right? Well, just because nothing lasts forever, that wouldn't mean that the tides are going to die out within the next few years. So, in other words, what we're saying is that this is number 2. This is weak. So if it's weak, it's automatically uncogent. So just to think about that a little bit, if I were to give this one to you on the exam, right? Again, if somebody came up to me during the exam and said, you know, I'm working on this problem, and you said you would tell us whether or not these premises are true or false, right? Which I will. And so if you were working on this one and you said, okay, this one here says nothing lasts forever. And then you ask me, well, so I need to know, does anything last forever? Which is, you know, kind of more of a deeper philosophical question that I certainly would be unprepared for. Nonetheless, I would know at that point that, I don't know what I would say, by the way, but I guess I would say, no, I don't think it's true. But at any rate, it wouldn't matter. I would know that something went off the rails here, right? Because you don't need to know the truth value of the premises to determine that it's weak and uncogent. All right. So let's try a couple more here. Number 3 says, the vast majority of Rose Bowl games, which, if you didn't know it, take place in Pasadena, California, have been played in freezing cold weather. Therefore, probably the next Rose Bowl game will be played in freezing cold weather. So we have to assume that the vast majority of Rose Bowl games have been played in freezing cold weather. Now, if you know about the Rose Bowl, if you know about Pasadena, you know that that's not really true, but we assume it is to determine if it's strong or weak. Okay? So if it were true that the vast majority have been, would it be likely then that the next Rose Bowl game will be played in freezing cold weather? Well, I understand that there is global warming going on. Nonetheless, right, it would still be likely that the next one would be played in freezing cold weather. So this is, in fact, a strong inductive argument, right? Because based on the premise, the conclusion is, in fact, probable. Since it's strong, though, that gives us another challenge here. Then we need to think, is it cogent or uncogent? So that's when we're asking, is the premise, in this case, really true? Is it really true that the vast majority of Rose Bowl games have been played in freezing cold weather? And again, if you didn't know it, but Pasadena is in sunny Southern California. They do not get freezing cold weather there very often, if at all. And so this is strong, but uncogent. All right. So let's skip number 4. Let's go ahead and get to number 5. Number 4 is a starred problem. So number 5 says, most popular film stars are millionaires. Now, I'm not sure what your edition of the book says here, but my edition says, Viola Davis is a popular film star. Therefore, probably Viola Davis is a millionaire. So again, our procedure here is to go ahead and presume that most popular film stars are millionaires. Let's presume Viola Davis is a popular film star. If both of those things were true, would it then be likely that Viola Davis is a millionaire? And in fact, yes, right? If both premises were true, it would be likely that she is a millionaire. So it is a strong inductive argument. But once again, we have this question. Is it cogent or uncogent then? We have to think about it since it's strong. So is it true in reality that most popular film stars are millionaires? Probably, right? I mean, not all people who star in films or who are featured in films maybe are millionaires, but if you're a popular film star, I think we can go ahead and give it to Hurley here. It's true. Now, the second premise, and this is the one that can trip people up, says that Viola Davis is a popular film star. And of course, if you've never heard of Viola Davis, you might be thinking, is she popular? I don't know. I will just tell you, because there's a history here with this particular problem, right? Hurley updates this textbook every few years. Of course, we know why. It's to charge students exorbitant sums for new editions of textbooks. But nonetheless, when he does this, he often changes the celebrity he's talking about, right? And over the years, it's kind of been hit or miss. I think one of the earliest ones he referred to was Leonardo DiCaprio. And I just really feel like if he just would have stuck with Leo here, he would have been fine. But for whatever reason, he keeps changing. So one year, right, the celebrity being referred to here was Lindsay Lohan, right? And that was a bit of a disaster. They had to burn all the text. Well, they didn't go that far to burn the textbooks, but anyway, there was a bit of controversy there, we could say. Viola Davis, is she popular? I mean, she was up for an Academy Award. I think she even won here fairly recently. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that the answer that Hurley is going for is that, yes, she is a popular film star, so that both premises are true. And finally, to get back to the answer, this one is not only strong, but also cogent. Okay. Now, what you also need to know is that in terms of your exam, as I explained earlier on the previous video, you're going to have the deductive and inductive arguments mixed together. And so if you look at exercise set 3, this is actually helpful because in this exercise set, you have both inductive and deductive arguments mixed together, and you have to tell which one it is and then apply the correct terminology. Now, these instructions don't ask you to determine sound or unsound or cogent or uncogent because in some cases you just can't, but we'll go ahead and think about that just to make a better attempt at coming to a type of exercise that will look like something you'll see on the exam. So if you look at exercise set 3, number 2, right? Exercise set 2, 3, we'll look at number 2. It says, when a cook cannot recall the ingredients in a recipe, it is appropriate that she refresh her memory by consulting the recipe book. Similarly, when a student cannot recall the answers during a final exam, it is appropriate that she refresh her memory by consulting the textbook. Now, first of all, we have to decide if it's deductive or inductive, right? And what will help us in this actually is thinking about the type of argument it is. And so what's going on here is they're comparing cooking with taking a final exam. Right? And they're basically saying, well, they're kind of similar in some ways. Well, anytime you're comparing two things and saying that they're similar and so we can come to some conclusion about them, you're going to be dealing with an inductive argument. And more specifically, an argument from analogy, right? Comparing two things, saying they're similar in some ways so we can come to some conclusion that in this case, taking a final exam, we should also be able to use the textbook, like we can use the book when we're cooking. So it's an inductive, it's an analogy. Is it strong or weak, then, we would ask. In other words, when you're dealing with analogies, when you're asked to determine strong or weak, really what you want to be thinking about is this a good analogy? Is it a fair comparison? Well, set aside wishful thinking, but cooking and taking a final exam really aren't very much like one another, unless you're maybe in a cooking school or something like that. But in that case, you might not even be able to consult the recipe book, so that wouldn't really work either. So these really aren't a good comparison. Instructors have good reasons for asking students not to consult the textbook during the final exam. And so it is inductive, it's an analogy, but it is weak. And if it's weak, it's automatically uncogent, right? Okay. So let's look at a couple more of these. Number 3 here says, the Broadway Theater marquee says that the Phantom of the Opera is playing nightly. Therefore, it must be the case that the Phantom is playing there tonight. So again, we are tasked with determining sorry about that, but if it's inductive or deductive. And so when you're doing that, you want to focus on the conclusion, right? The conclusion here, of course, is that Phantom of the Opera is playing in this particular theater this evening. Then you ask yourself, well, why do they believe that conclusion? And of course, they believe that it's playing there tonight because of what this marquee says. And of course, what a marquee is, and I'll put our answer up here, what a marquee is a type of sign, right? So this is a conclusion that's reached based on what a sign says. So it's an argument based on signs, which is inductive. It's an argument from signs. So then we ask, okay, let's assume that the marquee says that the Phantom of the Opera is playing nightly. If that's what it said, would it be likely then that it's playing there tonight? And we could reflect, well, yeah, on Broadway, they probably take great care to make sure their signs are accurate. And so this is a strong argument, right? It is likely that the conclusion will be true. If it's strong, then we can ask if it's cogent or uncogent. And here's where we'll have a little bit of a problem, because to determine if this premise is true or false, we'd actually have to go to Broadway and look at the marquee and say, oh yeah, it does in fact say that it's playing nightly, right? If we got there and instead it said Phantom of the Opera plays lightly, I don't know what that would mean, right? But if somebody misread it and that's not what it said, we'd say, oh, the premise is false, and it would be uncogent. But we'd have to actually go there to determine if it's cogent or uncogent. So I'll just leave that alone here. Okay, let's do one more, and this is going to skip the starred problem there. We'll get to number 5. And so number 5 says, suppose figure A is a triangle having 2 equal angles. It follows that figure A has 2 equal sides. Okay. So where can I fit that one? I'll try and put it here. So is it deductive or inductive, right? We think about what kind of argument this is. Talking about triangles, right? And so dealing with geometry, but geometry is a branch of mathematics, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, if the premise is true here, that is figure A is a triangle having 2 equal angles, do we think the author of this argument would think that it's likely or that it's guaranteed then that figure A has 2 equal sides? And I'm hoping we can realize that, in fact, yeah, this is a deductive argument. They wouldn't think that it would probably have 2 equal sides. They would think that somehow there's a mathematical law that says it has to have 2 equal sides. So it's deductive. It's an argument from math. And so now we can ask, is it valid or invalid? Okay, is it valid or invalid? So to do that, we're going to assume that figure A is a triangle having 2 equal angles. Would it then be guaranteed that figure A has 2 equal sides? Here's a little triangle. Let's say they both had, the same size angle there, size A. If these are equal angles, it does seem to stand to reason we could say that these sides would be the same length as well. So, in fact, it is a valid argument, right? It's a deductive argument. It's from math. And since the conclusion would be guaranteed by the premises, or the premise in this case, it's valid. Is it sound or unsound then? Well, it just depends on what we see here, right? If this, in fact, were to be provided next to the exercise, then, in fact, yes, this would be figure A with a triangle with 2 equal angles. And if that were the picture next to the problem, we would say it is sound, right, given this picture. On the other hand, for all we know, they could have figure A, and figure A could look like this. And, of course, in this case, you would have the same argument here, but this is not a triangle with 2 equal angles. And so in this case, this one would be unsound. All right? So lots more exercises here to work on. You need to do as many of these as you can so you get the hang of determining validity and strength and weakness, sound and unsound, cogent or uncogent. You'll see this reflected on the exam as well as the practice exam, so you can have at it. And I will see you next time.